Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome everyone to this first meeting of 2018 for the Policy and Finance Committee for the City of Topeka. Sorry. Oh. My name is Tony Emerson. I'm the acting chair right now until we decide in a few minutes who will be the chair for this year. And I'm representing District 4. If my colleagues would please introduce themselves.
Karen Hillard, District 1.
Jeff Cohen, District 8.
Thank you. The first order of business today would be to approve the minutes from the October 12th, 2017 meeting. I was a member of the committee at that time, but my two colleagues here were not. I have reviewed them and do believe that they're an accurate depiction of what happened. However, since my colleagues were not there, I would just ask that we handle this by unanimous consent. Are there any objections?
No.
No.
Okay. In that case, then the minutes of our October 12th, 2017 meeting are approved by unanimous consent. The second order of business will be to appoint a committee chair for 2018, and I would open the floor to any nominations. Mr. Cohen.
I'd like to nominate Councilwoman Hillard.
I would second that nomination. Any other nominations?
This is your last chance, Jeff. Okay.
Seeing none other, I would ask for a show of hands on who supports the election of Karen Hillard as the chairwoman. Right, any opposed? Same sign. The motion carries 3-0. I will now turn the meeting over to Karen Hillard.
Thank you.
Councilwoman Hillard.
You were very good at getting these things going.
Yeah, yes, that's my only skill.
Well, it's a good one. Hang on to it. All right, the next item that we have on our agenda is to review next steps in the tax increment financing policy. Let me see if you reversed it here. No. So that item goes kind of hand in hand with reviewing any questions that we have. So we can, with the permission of the committee, have Nikki Lee take over this item, and we can sort of address both together.
Sure.
All right.
Thank you. I think that what I was thinking with number 4 was just kind of to clarify when the governing body took the action to send it to committee. I think one of the intents was to get some feedback from the public, the developer community, and anyone that hadn't been heard from yet. So one thing that I think would be important to clarify is that if you guys did want us to schedule that type of meeting, what you were envisioning for that meeting, maybe who specifically you wanted to hear from, so that we can make sure to get that meeting on the books so that we can get whatever feedback you all still want to hear. So really, I would definitely be open to hearing what you all are thinking about what that might look like, and then we can kind of put those put the plan into motion and get that scheduled.
Great. Gentlemen? Tony?
Madam Chairwoman, thank you. Nikki, sorry, Mrs. Lee, I would like to do that. I think this is an important issue for developers, and since they're going to be the ones that are most impacted by this, them and the city, I would really love to get their input. So that would be my suggestion.
Okay.
Are there any in particular that you're thinking about, or someone that we've worked with recently?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's, of course, Midwest Health, and I don't know if that's our development group or Midwest Health. We have, of course, Cody Foster and the AIM Strategies Group. There's McPherson Contractors, and anyone else, anybody else that might use this type of tax increment financing.
Well, and certainly oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I just have a question, just a general question. So how often is this used? Does anybody know? I mean, is it when a developer comes and wants to do something is when we hear about it? Or, I mean, being fairly new, I'm not really sure.
If I may respond to that?
Please.
I think that's the way it's been in the past. I think one of the things we're trying to do now is maybe be more targeted. Like, I know over in District 4, over in East Topeka in general, it would be good to do some of this like proactively, like offer an area maybe that where we'd offer a TIF. I believe that's part of the thing that staff is looking at, being more
stimulate.
Correct.
Something.
Rather than being reactive, maybe be proactive with it.
That's a good idea.
and if I may, and not to put words in the staff's mouth, but if it was my understanding that one of the reasons to develop this policy, particularly at this time, was to make sure that there were some guidelines so that if we were going to promote a certain district or area, that we weren't just throwing away money. That it was, that there were enough guidelines that we weren't doing it, sort of like the economic development cash incentives ended up being to where nobody did anything in any city without asking for a whole package of incentives. That, you know, not wanting to get ahead of ourselves into business development to where nobody did anything unless they got a TIF or a SID. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yes, I would agree with all of that, that it's certainly, I'd say, somewhat rare that it gets to the point of actually coming to the governing body. So since I've been here, we've had one, and that was the Wheatfield TIF. And so that's over the course of 4 years. But certainly we would hope that as a community, we would be having more applications, whether it be one that we're being proactive on or ones that we're being approached on. We're definitely seeing the communities around us, that there's quite a few, not only TIFs, but CIDs, and it's just a kind of a sign of development and growth. We answer questions about it very often. So really, anytime we get a large project that we hear about in the community, whether it be us or GTP, it's something that we're constantly answering questions on. So it may not get to the point of actually pursuing a TIF, but we're very frequently receiving questions and inquiries about what a TIF might look like. So certainly having a policy to point them to would be definitely something that would be positive in those cases. City of Lawrence, they said they receive about 1 application a year. Lenexa has only 3 or 4 TIF districts, but they have multiple project plans. So that's something that, you know, 10 years ago, they were probably at the stage we were, where they only had 1 or 2 districts, and then they've grown their project plans over time. So it's not something that right now is a frequent process that we go through.
But sometimes you can be a little rusty if you're, you know, or make mistakes if it's not something you do all the time. So my understanding was you wanted to ramp us up and have us better ready for the next big unilateral development as well as some promotion. Councilman?
Yeah, I had a question about where are the districts now in town?
The 2 current districts are, so the Wheatfield development, you know where that one is, and that one actually starts on the 1st of 2019. And then the other one is the College Hill, so right at 17th and Washburn. The only other one that has existed in the city was Eastgate, so at 15th and Adams, and that one actually at the end of 2016, we ended that TIF district because it never fully developed to what the original intent was.
Is the development with Academy Sports, is that one?
That's a CID.
And the new hotel downtown?
CID.
You did check with the partnership, is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
About from the economic development perspective. Do you know if either this city staff or they checked, for instance, with IEDC, or, you know, there are people that have had some training, webinars, whatever it is, on what the current state of the art is about TIFs that might have enlightened on exactly what we're looking for?
Sure. And to that point, I would think that GTP would definitely be someone we'd want to involve in the next when we have that developer meeting. And they have said that they're here and ready and open to answer any kind of questions or thoughts on that. So they would be at the next meeting and prepared to answer all of this. I can tell you from the specific interactions that I had with them that one of the most important groups that we all look at for feedback on this kind of thing are bond counsels and financial advisors. And a couple of the members of GTP are very familiar with the groups that we use, so we all shared their feedback and looked at their best practices and looked to those groups' guidance as well. To your question about the economic development group specifically, I couldn't answer that for sure. I know that they did vet it generally through their side of the house, but I'm not 100% positive on that one. We also, in addition to that, we have multiple groups. We look at ICMA, we look at GFOA, so that's the International City Managers Group. GFOA is the Finance Officers Association. So we ran it through everything and looked at best practices that the city side would look at.
Okay. So, and we have had some comments so recently from at least Midwest Health with some concerns. We might or might not agree, so we want to make sure we hear both sides of those thoughts. Is there a sense, colleagues and staff, that if we chose to have a hearing, maybe gave ourselves some time on it, but invited developers that we're aware of, as openly as we can, actually, people that have participated in this process with us, as well as those that have not, that might be prospective developers, as well as the partnership representation, so that everybody heard each other's comments as well, would...
I'd say open it up to the entire development community.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just an open invitation, maybe contact the Home Builders Association and something like that.
General contractors, you just don't know who might have an idea or who knows who.
Right, and just maybe need that one extra encouragement to get something going.
Is there any reason on this one? I know that there have been some issues from the small businesses and entrepreneurs about our code issues, processes as well as requirements. Is there a reason to reach out to the small businesses, or even just a simple network to
maybe through the chamber?
Just let the chamber issue an invitation?
Maybe. Be a good idea.
You think?
Sure.
Okay.
And Madam Chairwoman, if I could just clarify for those who aren't aware of it, I mean, we all know what the GTP is, but it's the Greater Topeka Partnership, which is now what Go Topeka, a number of organizations have combined their forces into. So,
thank you. Others that we should consider for the invitation list?
I mean, the only thing that I would add is if it's definitely an open meeting, which of course every committee meeting is, sure. I've gotten feedback from some individuals, some constituents, so some of the people that were there the night that we had the discussion came and talked to me after the meeting, just kind of the, concerned citizen group. There may be some individuals there that might attend. School district, county, I mean, they're directly affected by this, so I don't know if
because they would all lose taxes, so yeah.
So if you want to specifically invite them or just be aware that it'd be open to all affected parties, they could all bring different perspectives on it too.
Oh, I think we would absolutely want to reach out if it hasn't happened, even if it has happened already, to all the taxing entities that would be involved when we did a TIF. Sure. Okay. Yeah, because that opens up the fact that there's the issue of the developments, and then there are the issue of the people who just want to comment on what we do with our tax money. So the publicity there could be to simply do a pretty thorough job of publicizing that hearing, to specifically invite anybody who's made a comment, and then do the best that we can to make sure it's very public. Sure. Even into the red couch or whatever. Everybody's default for making sure everybody knows. You can lean on Molly for that assistance. Correct? City communications to help with just the general publicity. Okay. Good input. Others? We may think of them, but,
Sure.
Well, let's talk about when we might set that hearing. Is there an urgency in your opinion?
No, there's no specific pending application or, deadline that must happen by which a certain time. I mean, you all have the deadline by which you're supposed to tell the committee, right, or report back.
City manager has a comment.
Sorry,
Oh.
I should have looked back there.
I'm sorry. Speak up.
Going to come up to
You
the...
probably need to get to a mic. City Manager Trout.
Yes, and I guess we do know a potential one in the pipeline that would be good that we, I think it came up just even yesterday, and it's probably he's not aware of it. And so
Okay.
there is one in the pipeline, and we have potential another one. And so we want to make sure that we do move this within the next few months. So I would advise that we're meeting hopefully maybe by the end of the month at the latest. I think 2 or 3 weeks of notice that we should be able to make that work.
Okay.
Most that we're talking about are aware that we're starting this process of the in-depth review by committee. And so they're already on notice or awareness that this is going on, and that we at this point would then provide a notice for the meeting. So it probably would be good if we could meet within the next 2 to 3 weeks at the latest.
Okay.
Okay?
And I would assume that with, if any feedback from you, given the variety of invitees, do you all think that during the day would be acceptable for this particular topic?
Yeah, I think my opinion would be in this particular topic, given the individuals that would be involved will have better participation during the day because most of them are professionals that are working and would add this to their schedule if we gave them advice or notice. And so I think it would be better if that can work with your schedules as well to be able to do so.
Well, if there were citizens who, for some reason, they seem to do a pretty good job at getting here, but if there were people that wanted to submit comments that were unable to attend, we could certainly include in our publicity that if someone, for some reason, was unable to attend, they are welcome to send the comments and that we would consider them at the meeting.
And as Nikki stated, the Greater Topeka Partnership has already told us they'll be here for that meeting once we notify them. So they're ready to go. Today they had a conflict and were not able to attend, but once we give them notice, they'll make every effort to have individuals here.
Thank you. Let's just go ahead and set it. So you key staff are here with your calendars. Let's just figure out when we can do it. 2 weeks from today would be probably during spring break.
23rd.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, I think that's...
We're getting close to spring break time.
Yes.
I think
Maybe the week
that
after
is.
that. Is that possible, maybe?
I'm
So
sorry.
it doesn't really, Friday the 30th
That would work for me.
is a Friday for the industry? Is a Friday okay? As far as you know? Or is midweek better?
I won't even begin to try to anticipate what their schedules are. So if
Yeah.
you all have I think they all would have representatives they would send no matter when it was, but
I mean,
I have no idea how to navigate those
Snugging it
calendars.
back to Thursday afternoon would be better than
Either works for me.
the 30th is Good Friday, 29th is Monday,
yeah.
Thursday. But if we did something like from 1 to 3 or
On the 29th?
on the 29th?
Sure.
Are we getting
Yep.
given enough time but getting ahead of it? Work for
Yep.
1 to 3 on the 29th?
Thanks to move.
Okay. Well, let's go with that unless we run into a difficulty there. That's an off week for council. Hopefully, we'll have a room available. That would be, we've got to get a location. Okay. Okay. In order to send staff off, then let's go ahead and go to number 5 and see if there are questions now from the body.
I've asked all my questions, Chair.
Okay.
Same here. I think in the follow-up to the council vote, I sent several emails, but those are still the only questions that I would have at this time.
Okay. I know that I personally didn't have, got a little overwhelmed with a variety of things that I'm involved with, so I have not read through all of the different cities' policies and so on.
Sure.
Would it be of value to have Nikki just sort of walk through and refresh us on some of the pro-cons
Sure.
while we're here?
Absolutely.
Councilman? Jeff?
I'm sorry, Chair.
To have Nikki walk through some of just what the issues are. What we had in part was a summary that the staff did, and then some feedback that that summary might not have covered all the points. And then some suggestions for some other cities to look at.
So I thought maybe if I walk through some of the key points in ours, and then along the way, as there were questions or clarifications, or if you want some direct comparisons to some of those other cities, then I'd be happy to do that. One kind of overarching note is that if and when you're comparing these types of policies, it's very easy to receive an isolated portion of other cities' policies and not have the full picture. So for example, for the city of Lawrence, one of the attachments that was floating around was just the TIF excerpt. Well, that's part of a larger economic development incentive policy that has a whole 10 pages before the TIF section with multiple overarching statements. So for example, in that policy excerpt, it might not say certain things, but in the introductory to the overall policy, it's got multiple points that apply to the policy. So for example, it speaks to affordable housing, it speaks to developers not owing on back taxes and special assessments, where if you're just zeroing in on the TIF part, you might not see that. So as there's kind of questions on comparing to policies, I definitely can and will kind of point to, well, it's not there, but it is here. And then in addition to that, a lot of cities have kind of operating procedures where it might not be in the policy, but it's in another document on the side that specifically outlines those types of things. So there's kind of multiple, I mean, there's multiple caveats when you're trying to compare apples to oranges. So, I mean, that's a lot of what we've spent a lot of time kind of sorting through those and comparing all of those. So when there's specific questions, then let me know and I'll kind of help you do the same discovery that I've been doing. I think to that point, what our policy has the advantage of doing, because it's new and one that we're crafting right now after other cities have kind of seen and had these experiences, is that our policy is pretty explicit in some areas that other ones might be silent to, because they either haven't had the opportunity to speak to that in their policy, or it's been in existence for 10 years and it might be a practice and not in their policy. So that's really a kind of a philosophical choice. You can choose to have your policy be a little broader and not outline things that you're doing in practice, but we'd rather be transparent and consistent and have it up front. That way there's no kind of room for interpretation. So there's some kind of overarching comments that really apply to all of these policies as you're looking at them. So you all have copies of these policies in front of you again, and I thought I'd go through each section and kind of point out what I see as the key points in each of those sections, and then specifically if they've been ones that have been pointed to in other policies, then I can answer any kind of questions on that. First of all, in section 1, the general policy statement, and this was one that was requested by Councilwoman Hillard that I really appreciate, is right there in number 6 from the get-go. It expresses a preference for pay-as-you-go projects, and that's just something that we believe very strongly that this policy, that be one of the key takeaways. And so we thought, let's just say that when you open up this policy right in the beginning, that way you don't get any place past that before you already see that statement. And then the other key point in this is number 3 talks about kind of striking the balance between both having some public benefits, but also having a benefit to the development itself. So that's really a key point that was we tried to strike throughout the policy, is something that both protects the city and encourages development. So there's really both sides of that are definitely equally important, but that we really consistently try to bring throughout the document. So in section 2, the section that outlines the kind of TIF districts versus TIF project plans, That has been a section that we've received some questions about, and that is something that is unique in our policy versus other cities' policies. They may not specifically call out what the process is to establish a district and then a project plan. A lot of people that I've talked to have said, man, I wish we had that, because this is really how it happens. In the city of Lenexa, for example, they have one huge large district that the city council established. This was over 10 years ago. And then they've had multiple separate project plans that have come in afterwards. It's the city center area. So that's one that, and really in all TIF projects, there's a distinct process for establishing the district and then establishing the plan. So we felt very passionately that it's just helpful to have that lined out in our policy from the start. And it very specifically lines out a scenario that the governing body might kind of take the lead in saying, here's a district that we want to identify, and then have the project plans come in right afterwards. So we believe that just procedurally that this does nothing but help to clarify how that process might go. But definitely if you or anybody else is picking this up and that clarity is not there, then happy to kind of help bridge that gap, because we want this section to be nothing really but helpful when we're setting up these processes.
Right.
Yes.
Mrs. Lee, my only concern about that is like the 60 days for you're saying for a redevelopment agreement. I'm sorry, to submit a redevelopment plan, and depending on when someone comes to us, I guess what I've been told, and I don't know how far we should go down this today because I'm sure we'll hear testimony, but 60 days is just not a lot of time to get a fully fleshed agreement out. And what I've been told is oftentimes they don't really start doing the development plan until they know they're going to get a TIF or not. And I mean, I can tell you on street projects, it takes a year to draw a street project. Some of these things are very complex, like wheat field, and it might take 9 months to do it.
So, I mean, to that point, this was really based on best practices and experience that we've seen around the state. I think we can be flexible if 60 days isn't the right number. What is the right number? Really, the reason this is here is to prevent something like an Eastgate where the district is established, and once you establish the district, you set that base value and you start those incremental property values immediately after, once that district starts, or once the first of the year after that district starts, those tax dollars are already going into that fund for that project. So this is really meant to prevent, if we had someone come in, set the district, and then, like in the case of Eastgate, which multiple things happen, but either they never come back and establish the project plan, or for some reason there would be that period of time. It's to prevent those tax dollars from starting to be that increment from really potentially sitting there and doing nothing for whatever period of time that would be.
Sure, but in the case that nothing happens, there won't be any increment to set aside, correct? It's just because all the base taxes are going to where they always went to, correct?
The base value that would be set aside would be whatever natural growth was happening. So you're right that if that base value was set somewhere where there really honestly wasn't any growth, then there wouldn't be anything designated. In the case of Eastgate, it may not have been what the original vision was, but there was a development of the laundry and the gas station and a couple other things. So even if that increment is small or whatever that may be, then that does start to go aside into that district.
Okay, thank you.
But I mean, you're right. If it's a true district where there's a but-for test and nothing would happen in that area without that, then there would not be much of an increment, if any, to be setting aside. However, it does start that timeline, at least on that district.
Sure.
So it's really meant to keep things moving. I think that's the general, but again, I think on that number of days, if developers have we want it to be 180, we want it to be 360. I mean, I think really whatever the governing body is comfortable with, we can be flexible on that.
Sure.
I think in part, we have been through this a couple of times, and so one of the lessons learned, correct me if I'm wrong, is that people get excited, you get a lot of conversation about this project, and one of the things that happened with Wheatfields was we went ahead and set hearing dates. There are steps that have to go, but they weren't ready because the development agreement wasn't ready. And so be it. But if we want to make sure that we're moving along to the benefit of everyone involved, we don't want to set the hearing dates until we've got the redevelopment agreement worked out. We don't want it dragging on forever. And if I understood it correctly, that was one of the reasons that you put it in there, because obviously somebody's not even going to go through the time and expense of proposing a TIF district if they don't have something reasonably well penciled out. But the details do have to be negotiated and ought to be negotiated before it goes into a public hearing so that it can be the steps can go much more smoothly, or as smoothly as possible.
Yes, I mean, I think, again, about striking the balance. We want to keep momentum on a project and keep that enthusiasm, but at the same time, we don't want this to be a sticking point we would hate to think that this would prevent a project or, be a sticking point for somebody. So I think we can be flexible on that number. It really just kind of, sets a clock and keeps things moving.
Sure.
It would be more of an administrative issue to make sure we didn't set hearings and get our clock ahead of it,
Yeah,
right?
sure.
Okay. Continue.
And then there are several points throughout the policy that speak to the funding agreement. So actually, this is something that has been pretty widely supported by the comments we've heard back, that the application amount and the funding agreement amount, right here it's listed as $30,000, is very typical, very standard among big communities and large projects. But it is pointed out both in the TIF district section and then later in the policy. So then section 3 goes on to more detail related to the project plan. And again, this is anticipating, this is really where the details start to fall into more place. The TIF project plan, probably the most important section here is that this solidifies the but-for test and actually sets out a percentage. So the but-for test is really, it's in every policy you see, and it's solidifying the idea that that incentive is needed by that development in order to occur. If it wasn't for this, then it wouldn't happen, or it wouldn't happen to the extent that the governing body is incentivizing. So the 20%, that's been a threshold that has been kind of asked about. Is that the right number? What is the right number? We've seen a couple of different percentages recommended to us. Some policies say no percentage, other policies. So for example, the City of Lawrence's policy says that but-for amount should be based on the gap that the developer has between what they have and what they need. So it's handled in very different ways. And really, I think that's a policy decision that is, that would be an important, I think, item to get feedback on from both what we're hearing back from developers and feedback from the governing body on that. It's really it really is a policy decision in how much you want to be seen as incentivizing what portion of a project.
Can I ask?
Yes, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Nikki, on that, twice it says in here that it should be a policy of the city to give priority consideration, and the first one is TIF applications that have pay-as-you-go, and this one is that have 20% of project costs or less. If we only have one or two of these a year, what is the difference between any consideration and priority consideration? I mean, I can see if you're handling 100 of these a week, but just kind of, can you explain that, and I'm not trying to put you on the spot here.
I think it's semantics. I mean, it's not like there would never be a scenario that we'd get two project plans at the same exact time that would be somehow competing or it likely wouldn't happen. I suppose it could happen. Yeah. I think it's a way to state a preference for something without coming out very black and white on it.
So the priority could in fact be the nudge for the decision on whether to even do a project with a single application.
Yeah.
Is that?
I guess I see it as it's whether you call it preference or priority. I mean,
Sure.
Sure, please.
sure, you can just stay there.
To me, this goes to us deciding what is the council's desire as far as when we look at projects. We want to say we prefer pay-as-you-go. In other words, if you come to us with the pay-as-you-go project, it's likely to be considered more favorably as you go through the process. We're not going to likely throw up red flags or stops to the process. The same would be true as a 20% level. That's more favorable for us because it's a better project and the overall picture based on the amount of incentives. It is a more qualifying project for us. And so really these are establishing them as qualifiers as to whether we support or I would say more enthusiastically support something that is 20% versus 25% because it's a better, more fair deal for the city. Not that we wouldn't consider those other figures or those other types of, types of projects where you might need to lend money, but it's really establishing our preference and kind of a qualifier as to what's better.
Or opens the door for the negotiation for that development agreement.
Exactly. So if they come in and they say, we're agreeable to your policy, as you stated, 20%, we'll do pay-as-you-go. Wow, we're moved. We've already moved through 2 hurdles quickly and can make their process go much smoother. So that's really what I think we're trying to do is establish what those are.
Okay.
And so that then becomes what is the city council's preference? What is their desire? What level do they want to see these at as the starting point, as the notice? Because one thing that I was going to say earlier too, this policy, when it sits out on our website and it's available, developers that we may never know will look at it and they will be able to understand what we are desiring before they even walk in the door or if they're looking at our community. So we have to keep it at a reasonable level, but you also need to tell them because that then may get their interest as well in our community because they know we're willing to do business at this level.
Right, so it's definitely an open message.
Yes.
So it might be that, and because aside from the major policy review here, we can and perhaps should consider doing wordsmithing as well before this would go back to the council. So if the term, instead of saying the city will provide priority consideration, if we'll provide more favorable consideration, if that's better language instead of priority when we don't have competition, then
Right.
we could consider
Agreed.
that. Okay, thank you. Yeah, you don't have to sit down.
Yeah.
All right.
Nikki's doing a good job.
Yes, she is.
No, I think,
But appreciate it. This is the conversation and the refresher
Sure.
and the prep
Yeah.
that we need.
yeah, and sometimes some of those words that we just take for granted because you see it every day, taking a step back and thinking, well, what does that mean and how would that be interpreted is very important. One of the other, I think, maybe sections we've received some questions on with number 2 here in section 3 about what the applicant must include evidence of. So, the A, B, and et cetera that goes on to the next page that lays out how much capital stack, how much financial capacity. In talking with most groups that do this kind of analysis for projects in the area, they're all looking for these same types of things. We're simply calling it out. So there's kind of been some questions about, is that the type of thing we need? Is that too much? Is that too little? All of these are examples of the same information that really any group is going to need to provide that kind of financial analysis on a project. If this wasn't in our policy, we'd be needing it anyways.
So we might as well say so.
I mean, that was kind of our recommendation, and just one thing I wanted to clarify is that just because it's not in a policy doesn't mean that they're not asking for that. And actually, there's all kinds of groups in the country that do that kind of financial analysis, and they look for different variances of this. I'm I mean, most importantly, there's always non-disclosures and different privacy agreements that make it so all of this information is private between who's doing your analysis and who that developer is.
Appreciate that. Questions on that one? There were comments on that. Okay.
And really, I'd say numbers kind of 3 through 7 is more of these preference, the same as Councilman Emerson brought up. What does preference and priority mean? These are our ways of expressing that the governing body would be interested mostly in, for example, number 3, areas of great need. So a TIF should be, by definition, it needs to be blighted or a conservation area. So this is one way of saying that wouldn't it be preferred or great if one of these projects was somewhere where we needed it for a variety of different purposes? So, number 3 and number 5 would be that it's in an area of need. It provides other public benefits in addition to the project itself. Again, these are preferences and priorities, so they're not saying that it's not a closed door to a project that doesn't do that, and most projects are going to do that. I mean, if you've got a project this large, they will have these kinds of benefits. And it's just a way to emphasize that you have a targeted kind of economic development approach. Again, number 4 and number 6 speak again to the types of funding that would be preferred. Number 4, that speaks to the property taxes. It does speak that there's a preference, and most commonly these types of projects are relying on the property tax increment. This does state about the sales tax, and it limits it to the 1% general sales tax, which is really a common point in a lot of the policies around the state. Some other policies don't allow the sales tax increment at all. Some of them allow 50%, as is the case in the city of Lawrence. So that is an area that you see a lot of variety throughout the state. We believe that we wanted it to be pretty open-ended in the policy, but we believe pretty passionately in limiting that it was the general use sales tax. That way we weren't eating into the, right now it's the street sales tax or whatever else that special tax is for, that increment can still go for whatever purpose that the voters approve for that to go towards. And then moving on to the next page under number 9 and 10, number 9 makes a statement for property tax being owed by the developer in other areas or by other entities. That is an increasingly more common item in policies. Sometimes it's not in the policy itself, but it might be in the application form or in another certification process. So in the city of Lawrence, it's not in the TIF section, but it is in the opening comments, and it is in a certification that's part of the application. So it's something that can kind of show up in different places. And again, we felt like, why not be the most transparent you can be and have it in the policy, just right in the upfront part. And then number 10 speaks to the timeline by which a project plan begins. So that is one section of the state statute that has been open for some interpretation. And this one simply says that when the governing body approves a project plan, that's when the 20 years starts. And it provides that clarity for both the governing body and the developers.
Madam Chairwoman?
Yes.
On that, Mrs. Lee, aren't these districts, aren't they 21 years? Is that correct?
These are 20.
Okay, is it the CID that's 21?
22.
Okay.
Which I don't know why that's 22.
Okay.
If anyone knows, then let me know.
Does anyone know? Is there a good reason for this?
That does provide some, on a lot of these projects where you've got a TIF on top of a CID and then, abatements. They're all on different calendars, different timelines.
Okay.
So it's kind of a constant point of confusion.
Okay, thank you.
I think it can be less than 20, but usually that's not requested.
Sure. Nevertheless.
Section 4 of the development agreement, that is another section that provides, I'd say, a little bit more specifics. And really this is a way to line out, as we're entering into the negotiation of the development agreement, what we see as our basics and our minimums in that negotiation. I actually haven't gotten a lot of specific comments or questions on that section. I think everybody kind of acknowledges that wouldn't it be great when you walk into a negotiation that you all know what the starting point is? So this really kind of goes through, and it's very broad. It states that we expect there to be a minimum private investment. We do expect performance requirements. We expect there to be consequences if those performance requirements weren't met. Everybody appreciates when the development agreement speaks to how actually expenses are reimbursed, and that really protects the developer, that they're getting consistency from the city as well. It does say that there will be the establishing of the base year value will be explicitly stated in the development agreement. The payments in lieu of taxes, that's something that it's not anticipated that in a lot of cases this would be used, but it does kind of light out an opening that if there was ever an appropriate time for that, that the agreement is where that would come into play.
Were there any comments on any of those?
I didn't receive any comments. Am I forgetting or missing anything on that? No, I think if anything, that was just appreciated, that it's kind of nice that to have that lined out.
Okay.
Section 5 on the fees, again, that was one that, I talked to a few people like Mr. Ledbetter that works with all types of clients, and he was kind of vetting that a little bit and making sure that those were fair and comparable to other fees around the state. And really the application fee of $5,000 is lower. It's not the lowest, but it's a very reasonable amount. And $30,000 is right at really where the market expects to see that kind of expenses. Section 6 on the design criteria, this is another, I think, just huge positive towards to have this policy, and it's something that really, a lot of this happens anyways. When you have a project this large, you will have a PUD process that already has requirements and recommendations for what in that development, what those development standards are, but this one specifically says that that's an important part of this process and that we do have design criteria that have to be thought about as these projects are started. Haven't received any specific comments about that one.
Okay.
So 7, the method of financing. Again, this just reiterates that the goal is that the development would pay for itself and that there would be a priority for pay-as-you-go financing. But it does line out if there was a situation where there would need to be financing or special obligation bonds. It goes into some specifics there, which of course all of that would then be even more specific within that individual development agreement. So there would be kind of multiple levels of criteria and decision points in that type of a project. And then at the end, a common clause really for all policies is that the governing body has the authority when and if appropriate to make an exception on different points in this policy. And again, that's just one of these statements that kind of reinforces that this policy is meant to be very flexible and something that can be adjusted to meet different project plans and needs.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments?
Nope. Can any of these sections and items be negotiated? I mean, that was one of the questions that I had, so I'm satisfied.
I would suggest only one other thing. Nikki and I spent some time on this earlier, but as we have opened this up and are looking at it, with the conversation that Nikki made at the beginning about the fact that Lenexa's policy, the core piece that we have to look at isn't everything because there are preambles to this whole set someplace else. One of the, and then further talking about the fact that City Manager Trout talked about people being able to simply pull this up on our website and look at it and see how concise we are, how clear we are, decide whether they want to do business with us and so on. We discussed whether the whereases, there are some redundancies in here, And also, when you get a series of whereases, if it's an ordinance, they get cut off when it's codified. And we figured out this was a resolution so that they would stay. But even though they're kind of nice to lay, it's a matter of style really when you do this sort of thing. And they would stay with this as a resolution. But if someone was searching this policy and they just wanted to know the financing or they just wanted to know the development agreement, would they miss anything? Is there anything in the whereases that doesn't show up again that somebody might miss or that is redundant so that it's phrased a little bit differently and might cause some confusion? So as you read through it, you might want to keep that in mind. And if you were the developer from wherever, getting on our website and reading it, whether it would serve your needs quickly and simply. If there aren't any further questions today, thank you so much. We have a lot of reading material that you've given us some context for as well. We will go for inviting everybody on our list for a hearing on the 29th from 1 to 3. And with that, I would move on to item number 6. This is the first meeting for this committee, and see if there are other items that have been referred to this committee or the committee itself has the right to take on issues, and whether there's anything else that you, as we're setting this initial calendar.
I have something.
Councilman Cohen.
Thank you. I'd like to talk about the city's residency requirement that our employees be county residents. Seems to me that would limit our pool of applicants for jobs, especially, possibly even more professional positions like engineers, where we could draw from the Kansas City market, maybe Lawrence, and have them actually work here. And I'm just not really sure, if it's something that we should proceed with, because it seems like it would be a good idea to get the best talent that's out there that would want to come and work for the city. So what do you guys think about that? I also don't know the history because, did we set this up originally to require our city employees to become invested in their community by living here? So.
I think you've been here too, but sure. I think I can safely say yes on that question, that's historic, and we hear it now. Why don't they live here? Why doesn't the city manager live here? Why don't all the department heads live in the city, not just in the county? So there have been debates and changes over the years. Mary's been here in Topeka, not necessarily working for the city, but I don't know how much you've watched that over time. But you're right, as far as what the reasons were. It may be a little bit different. That it comes up the most often regarding the management staff and law enforcement and public safety, police and fire, and having those individuals A, close by, and B, invested in the community. It certainly comes up from time to time just in terms of labor relations, which then is roughly 90% of our workforce, in terms of people wanting more money but not having to pay the taxes, and being invested in the community in that way.
Sure.
But also understanding it, shopping here, going kids in schools here, and so on.
I would just hate to lose out on some of those great talented people that may just live in Meriden or in Lawrence or in Holton. Yeah.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I know years ago you had to be a resident of the city of Topeka to be a city employee. I know because one of the guys that worked for me tried to get on the water department and he couldn't because he lived in the county. I believe now we've loosened that to you can be a county resident, but I'm really conflicted about this because I totally understand Mr. Cohen, what you're talking about on the need to, especially with some of our engineers and stuff like that, where it's a limited pool. On the other hand, we're talking in our economic development with the Greater Topeka Partnership and with Momentum 2022 that one of the problems we have is that a huge percentage of people that make more than $40,000 a year within the city of Topeka, not for the city, but here live elsewhere, and that's something we're trying to reverse. And I see this as almost being counter to that, because those particular jobs you're talking about would be in the $80,000 to probably $110,000 a year range. I do think there's something different when you're a part of a community, when the decisions you make, particularly as an engineer or a manager, affect you yourself. I think it does change. So I don't know, that would be a tough one for me, honestly, but I'd be willing to look at the data and think about it.
Well, and we needed, in my opinion, to have a little bit of discussion just to see where people were on it. If we could have some input, I mean, any committee has the right to put something on its agenda and consider it, but I don't know that there's been any consultation with you. Do you have any feedback, City Manager, about timeliness or whether or not you'd like to see this considered in a council committee?
Well, I think, to a certain extent, I think it would be good to discuss it. It continues to be brought up. It's brought up in our negotiations with different unions. And so I think having a discussion at the committee level is the best place for it. If we're really going to talk about it and delve into it, look at the numbers and do it, it would be better to do it at this level rather than, and then that way, if there was a real good reason, justification, then we take it forward to the full body. But it's not a bad practice to review types of policies such as that to determine if we need to make a change.
Thank you. My thought would be we're not sure how much time, whether we'll have one hearing and maybe just 2 meetings on this TIF and get it done with and move on. My inclination would be if the body wanted to take it on, that we should calendar it after we finish the task that was assigned to us. Does that sound reasonable? Well, then I would entertain a motion as to whether we would add it to our charge for this year.
I'd like to make that motion.
Okay.
I'd second that.
Been moved and seconded to add the issue of...
And do you know when that would be? Is this a quarterly, does this committee meet quarterly or as needed? Or?
All these committees meet as needed, and so it's really up to us.
Okay.
If we want to meet quarterly, we probably could.
Okay.
But we've decided that we're going to meet in 3 weeks and see if we can knock out this first issue. But at that point, I mean, we will all be facing whatever our council schedule is at that point. We'll be doing CIP, starting budget, so we may want to look at some of those calendars to see when we feel like we could tackle it.
Yeah, I'm thinking if we put it off too much, we'll be into budget time.
That's
then
right.
We'll all be really busy with that. So.
Correct, and we just don't know yet how much time it will take us. But talking about that just for another step, if it turned out that we had our hearing at the end of March and then maybe did a wrap-up to report out a week later, let's say, in a perfect world, and finish that issue, we'll be voting through the CIP roughly at the same time. We'll be going into, and we could either try and squeeze it in as we start with budget, or we could wait till the fall.
The fall is fine. I just don't want it to get forgotten. I've had several city staff approach me privately that saying that if we could get a bigger pool of candidates, we would be a better city. And I tend to agree with them. And I just don't want it to fall off our radar.
Of course, you all are great.
Well, this is a new idea, of course, but do you want to just wait till we're done with TIF to decide, or do we want to set a commitment that we'll try and squeeze it in before July 1st?
I don't think given a date commitment like that's necessary. I just think let's just not let it fall off our radar for the year.
Okay. Once the word gets out that we're willing to consider it, there will be a fair amount of public interest. So, and staff interest as well. So if it would be reasonable then to have our minutes reflect that once we finish the TIF, we will see if we think there's adequate time to address the issue in the late spring. If not, it would likely be fall. Is that
That's fine.
fair enough?
Yes.
Does that sound all right to you all?
Sure.
Does that sound, okay. Any other items that the members are interested in considering? Any other items from the staff or others who are here? This is all staff. Well, with that then, we'll adjourn the meeting and see each other soon.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
Thank you.